Yes, we're back in Parliament tomorrow. I'd be expecting a statement on various COVID measures that have been announced, the masks and restriction or guidance for schools, which will be taken as gospel by schools, as you know, and an update on the Omicron variant's progression through the country. I think the good news is that it's certainly peaked in London. If we've coped with the NHS in London, where apparently a third of individuals have no vaccination whatsoever, that bodes pretty well for the rest of the country, and also a complete vindication of the 101 of us Conservative backbenchers who opposed Plan B.
Completely. And on behalf of all listeners, I think I could probably say, thanks to all of you 101, because actually you gave, in a sense, you gave the backbone, the rod, and also, in a sense, the challenge to the Prime Minister, which led to him making the right decision, as opposed to the decision that Nicola Sturgeon and Mr. Drakeford made in those respective cousins.
And of course, the absolutely useless opposition we've got in this country, who wanted stronger lockdown measures all the way, Richard.
Maybe we'll have time to talk about Sir Keir's vision that he announced this morning later, Andrew. But focusing, will you be talking tomorrow in Parliament about the big question, which is the isolation period, because it's still 7 days in the UK. That's better than 10 days. But the US has gone to 5 days. I think France has gone or going to 5 days. In a sense, that's, that extra 2 days is really important if it's considered sufficiently appropriate and safe. Is that going to be on your agenda tomorrow?
Absolutely. And let's be clear on the science. This is a respiratory disease transmitted as an aerosol. If you're self-isolating and you test your nose and your throat and you have no virus particles there, and you do that on 2 consecutive days, I would really like someone to explain the science to me as how possibly, if you feel well enough to go back to work, why you shouldn't, when you clearly are not transmitting the virus if it's not in your airways.
And at some point, we have to have the confidence to move from accepting that actually we're not in a pandemic anymore. We're, in a sense, it's now endemic, and we've got to learn to live with it. And we were doing, I think, relatively well in sort of the last quarter of 2021. Then obviously Omicron rocked up, in a sense, as we expected. There may well be a new variant. That's what happens, for example, in winter. It happened last winter. There was no great surprise. But mercifully, it's milder. Everything proves that it's milder. So now actually it's about leadership, surely, Andrew, to say we've got to get on with it. We've got to start the process of recovery. And where are you on this mass testing, Andrew, of healthy people? I mean, 1.5 million tests, albeit we're running out of them. When does this stop? Because obviously a lot of people are making a great deal of money.
Absolutely. Follow the money, as they say. There's going to be some tough calls coming up for the government soon, and they've got to make the right calls on them, and we're going to get back to some semblance of normality. Yes, Omicron is highly transmissible. That's because it's not a pneumonic disease. It's a disease of the trachea and the bronchioles. That's why your incubation period is less, because it's less invasive to the body. It's why it's less pathogenic, because it's not going down and doing a lot of damage in the lungs. Because it's so transmissible, the peak is going to come very quickly. In South Africa, it was 3 weeks, and it's dropping just as quickly as it came, because it's running out of hosts. Well, there's got to be a point where, in the next couple of weeks, where the government will be in a position where they can say, look, we've peaked with Omicron. It's very mild. For most people, it'll be no more than a cold. We're in a position where the NHS has coped with the peaks. We now can actually get rid of self-isolation altogether and treat it as a mild illness, because we know the NHS can actually cope. And all the science is also showing, which is very interesting coming out of South Africa, that although the Alpha, the Beta and the Delta variant, and to an extent being double jabbed, give very little protection against Omicron, once you've had Omicron, you've got considerable protection against other variants. And I think that's going to be absolutely fantastic going forward. So why would we want to now stop that, keep people in self-isolation when that's the case?
It feels to me that the next couple of weeks is going to be an absolute key battleground between the diminishing number of scientists and certain leaders and doctors within the NHS who are still promoting extreme caution, promoting more restrictions, more sort of semi-lockdowns. But I think they're diminishing in number. And I think some of the journalists, interestingly, who were previously pro-supporting the experts are now questioning that. And I think the growing number of people who said, do you know what, we're done. We've done what we were asked to do. New year, new strategy. We've got to live with this thing. And I think so many people have done what they were asked to do. They've been double jabbed, they've been triple jabbed, and still getting Omicron. I've got lots of friends, Andrew, who've been boosted and then they've now got Omicron, but they're saying, well, it's a sniffle, it's a cold. So what? I get one of those every year. It's just another one of those.
Well, over time, coronavirus has got to mutate to a position where it becomes much more transmissible and much less deadly. That I think Omicron's a natural progression to that. I mean, a large amount of the common cold that we all get on average 3 times every year, they are coronaviruses, and they probably started out many tens of years ago as lethal as COVID-19 was with the Alpha variant. But they've evolved to be much milder and much more transmissible, and they become endemic. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about that. We don't lock the country down because there's 200 million infections with the common cold a year, and that's the way we're heading with Omicron, thank goodness.
But if we just come on to the NHS within that, because in a sense, it's clearly not being overrun mercifully with Omicron patients. The key issue now, and you notice how the language shifts, we've now got to protect the NHS because of the staff and the potential staff shortages. And so this feels to me, again, the sort of the goalposts are shifting, the goalposts are moving. But again, this is part of it feels it's potentially the last big debate. And
well, as I said,
where does this go, and how do we just get it over the line?
We're going to have to get to a point when once Omicron variant has peaked in London. There's probably a week ago. In the next week, it's going to peak around the rest of the country. Then there's a discussion to be had about whether we need to self-isolate at home. When the NHS has coped, we've gone over the peak, and the virus itself is running out of fresh hosts to infect. Whether the bigger risk to our country and the well-being and lives is forced absenteeism due to self-isolation. And that's a debate and a big, tough call for the government to make. And that's going to come in the next couple of weeks. And that will be a game changer.
And so this really it's a vital sort of 10 days, actually, for you MPs in Parliament, it seems to me, to encourage the Cabinet and the Prime Minister to make those calls. And look, I always talk about the courage of leadership because, yes, these are big decisions and you've got to weigh up a range of evidence rather than just one bunch of advice from one side of the argument. But I think within that, particularly given the shortage of tests, Andrew, is going to be this debate about when we stop testing 1.5 million people, healthy people, because that then is part of the whole issue of, well, you've got a never-ending pandemic like this.
Well, I think we need to, people need to test if they've got symptoms.
But of course that's different, isn't it? Because if you've got symptoms, you're not a healthy person.
But that's right, and that's what we need to be getting to now, is just getting people to test who've got symptoms. And I honestly think within 2 to 3 weeks we need to move into a point where we're not going to be self-isolating for people who have got symptoms, because the NHS has coped, and the bigger threat to our whole way of life is forced absenteeism. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. If 10% of the NHS staff are not at work because they're in forced self-isolation with what effectively is a cold, that's going to cost people's lives. And that's got to be weighed in the balance as well. And don't get me on to making children wear masks in schools. I did have a thought this morning, Richard. I hope those teachers are wearing them all the time in the staff room.
Yes. Well, that's going to be very interesting. I'm quite sure we'll hear a lot more about that over the next couple of days. But again, we heard yesterday from the Education Secretary, Nadeem Sahawi. He promised that he was going to put to Parliament some more internal evidence. I think basically it's a sort of anecdotal survey of certain schools to you as MPs and to the country about the the benefits of wearing a mask. But and he says it's only for the minimum period possible. I worry this will be for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the only thing we know about this is that it causes harm to children. That's the main thing we know.
Well, I've always thought we were living in a society where we protect our children and young people from harm. And why I can't understand is why are we demanding that children take this precaution of wearing masks when people in office blocks are working next door to each other? They're not having to wear masks. And the only presumption I can come to is we're asking children to make a sacrifice to protect us, and that doesn't sit very well with me at all.
No, nor me, because of course all of the teachers have been offered the jabs. I suspect the vast majority of them have been jabbed, so therefore they've been protected from the worst of the disease.
Let's not beat around the bush, Richard. The job of the teaching unions is to represent the interests of the teaching profession. Who speaks for the children?
Well, that's right. Well, there are some great lobby groups like Us For Them who are speaking for the children, but maybe they need their own union. Andrew, thank you so much for those thoughts. That's Andrew Bridgen.